recording too. So I see we have some people that are starting to join us. So it always takes a couple minutes for everybody to get settled in, but I hope that people know that we are recording so that if they have to leave for any reason or they come in late, this will be reside on our YouTube channel, and I'll put it up on Facebook a little bit later too. So so while we're just sitting around chatting, hello Rachel, hello Kate.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
At least we know we're online and people are coming in, because I will still never forget the time, I will say relatively early in the pandemic when nobody knew Zoom very well yet. I still remember the time a whole group of authors and myself were all in what we thought was the green room for about 10 minutes before an event. And you would not believe the bitching about deadlines and, bad reviews and all the things that we were doing and getting out of our system. And then we realized that everybody who was logging in was like overhearing the entire conversation.
Because you don't see them because they're in the webinar. Yeah,
I was swearing, wasn't I? Yeah. I was swearing.
You swear, Kate Quinn? You?
Like I'm married to a sailor.
Shocking. Oh, I see people in the chat.
I
see like
lots of
Meissner, another fantastic Warwick's patron.
And Gina, I love Gina. It's like, I don't remember
fantastic.
a time before Zoom either, but you know what? I remember that panic in March of 2020 and Google was my best friend when it came to Zoom, because it was just like, how are we going to do this? So yes, that was really fun.
But isn't it nice now? I mean, because like I used to think before, like people would say, well, I know you have to, I'd sometimes get the occasional thing for a book club when it's like, well, we're only 2 hours away. Can't you join us? And I'm like, that's 4 hours of driving. And it's like, yeah, but we can't do Zoom. We can't do Zoom. We don't like doing it online. Just drive to meet us. And now I can actually say, you don't do Zoom? Really? Yeah. You have no idea how.
Yeah.
I know you have a wine club every week. I know you have an online Zoom club. You know how to do Zoom.
Exactly. They just want you in person.
I still love Kate's. When was that, Kate? In last year when you were like, okay, I know I have a book club. If it's yours, can you remind me?
Yes, I had it in my calendar and I had no information about it at all.
Is this yours?
Yeah, so I'm literally taking to like Twitter and Facebook and be like, if you have a book club that's starting in 10 minutes, please hit me up, because I have nothing and I don't know what book I'm discussing or where you are.
Oh, that would have been hilarious if everybody just like random people about, yeah, it's me.
You could have done it. I would have, you sent me a link and I would have gone.
Love it.
What book
okay, well, I think we've got pretty much everybody in the room at this point who's going to be here. I see you all are using the chat. That's awesome. Kate and Rachel are going to chat for about 35 minutes. There's a Q&A button. Hours and hours. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Hold off a little bit before you start popping questions in there. Maybe at about the half-hour point, start popping your questions into there, because Kate's going to bring those to Rachel after they're done talking, because they have lots to talk about. So there's that. And then Rachel's book is actually not out yet, so this is like a pre-pub.
This is like special VIP behind the scenes. But
yeah,
I'm just bringing it. I actually don't even have the final copy yet. That's how.
Yeah. But
just
how
have
early we're doing
copy.
this.
Yeah.
So you can pre-order it though, and so I'm going to put the link into the chat on how to pre-order for work. So we'd love for you to do that. We're trying to get some signed book plates.
They have been
and when
sent,
we get them.
But Canada Post said there's just been a bit of an issue. So I did everything possible to let everyone know there was nothing contaminated in the envelope. It's paper book plates,
right?
But hopefully they get there soon.
So what we'll do is, if you do place an order with us, we will ship you the book. And if and when those book plates get to us, we will, if they come before the 15th, we'll include them. If not, we will send them to you separately if and when they return. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to, get up the screen, let you guys chat, and we'll have a great evening tonight. So Rachel McMillan is the author of the Herringford and Watts Mysteries, the Van Buren and DeLuca Mysteries, and the 3/4 Time series of contemporary Viennese romances. She is the author of Dream, Plan, Go, a travel guide to inspire independent adventure, which I love. Rachel lives in Toronto, Canada. She's here today, as she showed us, to talk about her new book, The Mozart Code. And joining her is Kate Quinn. And Kate, we've decided in the green room that she's an honorary, she needs to start getting a stipend from Warwick's because she does so many Warwick's events. We love that about her and we love her. So thank you for that, Kate. In fact, I got a little note from your publicist today about something that might be happening at the end of March. May?
I don't know. I don't know anything that's not happening this week. I'm taking it 1 week at a time.
I can't remember now because the book's coming out at the end of March. Oh, it's the end of March that I think we're talking about. Anyways, so keep your eyes out for that, everybody. Kate is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of historical fiction. A native of Southern California, she attended Boston University, where she earned bachelor's and master's degrees in classical voice. A lifelong history buff, she has written 4 novels in the Empress of Rome saga and 2 books set in the Italian Renaissance before turning to the 20th century with the Alice Network, The Huntress, The Rose Code, and that forthcoming The Diamond Eye. All have been translated into multiple languages, and I did update this. She and her husband now live in Seattle with their rescued eyes. So with that, I'm going to go away. You two have a lovely conversation, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you.
All right.
I always tease you, Kate, like Kate Quinn divides her time between
Yeah, that's just the weird
her
thing
new
about being a
bio.
military
She
family. Now I
divides
go
her
back and
time.
forth. I will save just for everybody here first, since the book is not out yet, do not be worried that we will spoil the end for you. We will keep the talk spoiler free. And I do have the chat pulled up on the side, but sometimes if there end up being a lot of comments, if you put a question there, it may get lost. So if you go to the bottom, go to the left of the chat button, you'll see Q&A. You can put a comment, you can put a question in there for us to answer later, and that won't get lost in the same way that sometimes comments will if a lot of commentary starts flying. Anyway, so first of all, it's nice to be in this sort of like pre-game event for your book. I can't wait to give this a shout out. I have already read it. I'm the lucky one. Why don't you first of all just give us sort of like the elevator pitch on what it's about, just to fill people in.
So the Mozart Code, I'll just show the cover again, is the story of 2 people who are embroiled in post-war Vienna and Prague, where the death mask of Mozart could actually be the turning point in the encroaching Cold War. One of the 2 cities I write about will fall behind the Iron Curtain and one will not. But at the end of the day, it's a love story between Sophie and Simon, who have known each other for years as the British aristocracy end up together at Bletchley Park during the war, and now are working with Simon's espionage team in Vienna in kind of working to see how artifacts and relics can inform how power balances are being spread. And so it's all about their relationship against the backdrop of this incredible post-war world where Vienna was quartered by 4 allies. Prague was on the turning point of communism, which it would eventually experience for several subsequent decades. It's a love story. It's a bit of a mystery, and it is my love letter to Vienna and to Mozart and to all of the esoteric art things that we forget about when we think about how the war shifted and changed the Europe after the bombing and the treaties and everything like that.
So if there's anything I find interesting about a book is that when you're writing it, at least if you're me, I never have any idea what the themes are, but the themes sort of rise up through the book, as you write it, or at least as I do. So generally I find only after I'm about 3/4 of the way through the draft, it's like, oh, my subconscious has been tap dancing all over my rough draft and has been imposing its themes on it. As far as theme, or as far as just the story, what is it that you want readers to know about this book before they go in, or to take away from it?
It really is an exploration of love, and 2 people who are so guarded that they're scared of love, expressing love and accepting love. And given the fact that they come from this highfalutin background where love was used as a currency, into the war where love was kind of shoved to the side as they were working for Great Britain, and now when they're in this tumultuous post-war world, it's a treatise on love, but it's also a treatise on belonging. My hero Simon is caught in a moment where he has to reconcile who he wants to be with the very illegitimate chain of his background, his unknowing about his parentage. So I always find that it's a love story at the intersection of betrayal and belonging. So if people
love
really
that.
want a character-driven piece that just happens to feature some really cool post-war stuff, then Mozart Code is probably for them.
No, that's wonderful. A love story at the intersection of, what was it again?
Betrayal and belonging.
Oh, that's good.
Well,
I like
thanks, Kate
that.
Quinn.
Wonderful. Now let's talk first. Now, since this is a romance,
Mhm.
and the romance is really at the heart, of what we're talking about here. What's the trope? Because romance readers always want to know.
Marriage of Convenience, kind of
Oh.
like another book that I kind of love called The Huntress by Kate Quinn, which is also, I'm sorry, it's also at its heart a marriage of convenience story, and people don't always know that it is
It's
a
trope-tastic.
marriage
It's there.
of. Do you know what else I brought, Kate, to show for
What?
show and tell? The Morning Gift by Ava Ibbotson, because it's part
Yeah,
of
Rachel and I are huge fans.
This is how we bonded, guys.
Yes. Rachel and I, one of our first bonding, which happened over Twitter, which again, follow her on Twitter, is that we're both huge fans of the wonderful romance author Eva Ibbotson, who only has a handful of romances and some of the best writing, not just romance novel writing, but writing period in the business. She's one of my top 3 writers of all time. And she writes so wonderfully. About Europe, if you want a trip to Vienna, virtually speaking, check out The Morning Gift or Medensky Square, for the ones I love. Pick that one up. So that's great. And especially if you are missing the chance to go travel Central Europe right now, but really would like to. So now that we have a marriage of convenience, let's talk about our 2 principals. And let's start with Simon, because I love Simon and Rachel loves Simon, and that's her hero here. I always picture he is played by Matthew Good in my head, the ultimate,
which is who is playing
Weedy
Ian.
Englishman with beautiful blue eyes. And so let's talk about him. What you spent a long time with him in this book, and I can't think of anyone I'd like to spend a long time with more than Simon. So let's talk about him. Why is he special? What differs him from some of your other heroes, and why are readers going to fall in love with him?
Well, it's funny because Kate actually spent a lot of time listening to me rant about how difficult Simon was to wrangle on the page, because a lot of the key writing for Mozart Code happened during the pandemic. So Toronto was one of the most locked down cities in the entire world. And as someone who lives on their own, Simon became my friend. He really did. He was somebody who I created as a plot piece in the predecessing novel called The London Restoration. It doesn't have to be read sequentially. Both are anomalous from each other, but I created Simon in that book as a plot point so that my heroine of that book could have a tie to MI6. But there's a scene where Diana, the heroine in that book, sits down at the Savoy for tea with Simon, and as soon as Simon sat down, he told me his whole story. And one thing I really wanted to do was show, I say that these 2 books are peppered with Bletchley Park. They are not immersed in Bletchley Park like The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. And funnily enough, when I was researching Mozart Code and London Restoration at Bletchley, I had no idea Kate was doing The Rose Code. So that the title is not me stealing from Kate. I just wanted to pepper. And so there was a gentleman at Bletchley, Hugh Alexander, who was there because of his impressive chess skills. And so I really wanted to feature somebody who fought his war through a different type of intellect. I would say Simon is different from my other heroes because for the first time I created what I think is a conventionally handsome hero. And we call this his armor. He is someone who suffers from deep insecurity due to his illegitimacy, and his illegitimacy is on the back of the cover, so it's not really a spoiler.
Yeah, you're good. It's not a spoiler.
But he's illegitimate, born into this incredible family, has never really fit in, and he really is trying to make sense of his world through one war after another. So I hope people fall for him, because while he does have that dashing physical trait that will hopefully allure women to him because he's such a specimen, that was very intentional for me to be able to bring out some of his more vulnerable sides. He's also a gentleman who falls head over heels in love with the heroine, with Sophie, who feels that his own life is elevated by her strength and would pursue her to the ends of the earth. There's a line in Les Miserables where Jean Valjean recognizes that Cosette, his adopted daughter, was filling in for all the and not in a creepy way, but filling in for all the relationships he never had because he's been in prison. And I look at Simon as never having a mother, never having the opportunity to bring a girl home for the weekend. His dalliances stayed in the city, and he has Sophie, and she becomes a stand-in for all the love he never had. So I'm hoping everybody is like, oh my gosh, Simon, he's so loyal. So I hope people love him, because I do. He and Kate knows this because she received many frantic late night texts from me about this. He kind of hung out in the pandemic with me for all of 2020. It was me and Simon.
I will say, if I needed to sum Simon up, I would say, like, he is, outwardly a British icicle. He is a tall drink of water, a long, cool drink of water in a Savile Row suit, but underneath he is a total gooey cinnamon roll. It just, kind of chips
he's
through.
Such a beta hero, but undercover. So and I like that.
Yes. And now we have to talk about who is the woman who turns him into absolute goo under that Savile Row tweed heart of his. And, I will just say I liked this to the start too, because this is one of those things where it was clear where two writers can take the same amount of history and maybe end up making a similar choice.
Yeah.
Rachel and I both wrote heroines who worked at Bletchley Park. For the most part, Sophie's who worked at Bletchley, her work is in her, that work in this book is going to be mostly in flashbacks periodically that you will see, and in references that she makes, but she did work at Bletchley Park, just like my girls in the Rose Code. And I noticed I was tickled. Rachel and I made a very similar choice there, where we both wanted to have a civilian heroine who worked the bomb machines. And the thing is, the bomb machines at Bletchley Park were mostly worked by Wrens, women in the Women's Royal Naval Service, and we didn't want that for our heroines. So both of us made the same choice, where we landed on the same factoid, which is that
and we had no idea. It's fantastic.
It was fun. The bomb machines were large, and they need to be serviced by women who generally they had to be 5'8", 5'9", or taller. And so we both had the solution of, well, at one point they ran a little short and they pulled some civilian women in to help, and they asked for the tallest woman in the room. So that's a choice that I made. And unbeknownst to me, now knownst to you, Rachel made the exact same choice with Sophie, who is about 6 feet tall in her socks, and also works the bomb machines of Bletchley. So that about Sophie. Let's see, what else can you tell us about Sophie, who turns Simon into such a puddle?
And I really wanted to write, my sister-in-law is 6'2", and she just commands, it's just fantastic. I've always wanted to write a tall heroine who is not at all self-deprecating about it. It doesn't always happen this way. I'm sure it's the same for you, Kate. Some books, the characters sit down, and there are a couple. London Restoration, I had Brent and Diane at the same time. I knew how they worked into the ecosystem of that world I was creating. I had Simon first. He told me his entire story at the Savoy when I was using him as a plot point, who got his own book. I was like, how do I come up with a woman for him? And what I decided was that she would have to be his equal, but also not just his equal in terms of intelligence and strength, but somebody who would draw him outside of himself, so that every moment we get where Simon is experiencing this journey towards believing that he is worth something, that he has the ability to self-assess, he is able to do so because she is pulling him out of his British icicle shell. And so one thing I very intentionally did was find a way to counterbalance their viewpoints. So you'll see in Mozart Code, Sophie's POV, point of view, is through the realm of music, through Mozart, and through the fact that she's a classical pianist. Simon's view of the world is through a chessboard and the game he's playing throughout the book. And the more we get Simon and Sophie together, the more those viewpoints merge. So soon Simon's point of view is overtaken by musical references in the same way that Sophie's is overtaken by chess. So I really needed someone who counterbalanced him, who drew him out of his shell. The first time they really meet, she shucks an oyster at his ear. I really wanted someone who definitely understood that he was gold, and she is the only person to see him when nobody else does. So the fact that I could have her experience a bit, this is not really a spoiler, of self-esteem issues. She is initially going to be in the SOE, the Special Operatives Executive, but because of her highfalutin background, she's found out early. She's sent to Bletchley. She works with the bomb machines because of her height. She takes a little bit of a different path. And I thought that that was perfect for Simon. And I should throw away that Sophie Villiers is named for Diana Villiers in the Patrick O'Brien, Aubrey and Maturin series. Diana Villiers is one of my favorite heroines. And so there's lots of little Easter eggs about Diana in Sophie's composition. But hopefully readers find that they balance each other out really well.
Now, the other thing I really like about this book, and something that will set it apart from a lot of war novels, World War II books, is that this is really much more, less a book about war, and it's more a book about aftermath, which is something that I adore, because when you're in a war, there is a real mentality in or not just a war, but any crisis. The human mentality is that you just adopt the just got to get through it mentality. It's like, just got to get to the other side, just got to survive, just got to get through. And then it's not until you get to the other side that you suddenly have the room to take stock, take a breath, and look around. And suddenly you have to come to terms with everything that has happened during the war, including maybe some bad decisions that you made or things that have changed under your feet. And you don't even know how to deal with that. I mean, people struggling with PTSD and now have to find the way around it. People who are, made hasty marriages and now have to, deal with that. Hasty marriage is going to be an issue for you, for Simon and Sophie rather. And then, like the people who now have to, they have a family that may have changed, and now they have to deal with those changes. So that's one of the reasons I love books about not just war, but aftermath. And most of my 20th century books do have something about the aftermath of a war, as well as being in the thick of it. And this book is so much about aftermath. It's literally in the rubble of a city that is trying to piece itself together. So Vienna and Eastern Europe in general, the whole panoply of it is really almost another character in this book. So let's talk about that aftermath. I know you have a great love too for Vienna, but
I do.
What is it? Let's talk about this. This is fun.
I love, and I kind of got to do this in the London Restoration, which is my 2020 release. And that was a young architectural historian who is basically consulting on the rebuilding of the amazing Wren churches, because so many historical artifacts were absolutely obliterated and so many buildings were, as you say, in the rubble. But the amazing thing I found when I was researching the post-war years is that unintentionally it exhumed amazing things from the Roman time periods, which I mentioned for you because you're a Roman historian. And so I was always really fascinated by a snippet I read years ago that I put in my ideas folder, that it was believed, historians are kind of torn on this, that the death mask of Mozart popped up at a Viennese pawn shop in 1947. And I've always really wanted to play with that. And once I decided that Simon Barr needed his own story, I was like, how do I do that? And I think what I really enjoy about writing Vienna in the post-war, not just for like the Graham Greene third man kind of espionage, dark noir type thing, is that my characters still see the perspective of the beauty that it will attain again. It still has that shadow of its dual status as the Baroque Empire's middle place. So, and that's something that I find, Huntress, Ian, of course, you know, the Huntress, it's set in Vienna for half of it. Yeah, that's another Zoom, but I really wanted to write Vienna historically, and I think that the only way to truly appreciate that city is to see it not only for the opulent whipped cream world that it is, but that if you get close enough to the buildings, you see the cracks. You see this beautiful place, but if you step up closely enough, you can see where they rebuilt it. And I thought, what an amazing, as you say, it's so interesting to see how people repair. What an amazing symbol, emblem for life. We're just coming out of something that was absolutely shocking to the entire world, this moment of kind of global empathy. Clearly, there are things going on in the world that will have a lasting scar and impression. And that the post-war worlds really took Sophie and Simon further and further away from the very high class backgrounds they come from. And
that very insular world of the British aristocracy.
Absolutely.
All about who you know and who you went to school with.
And now it's like, whoa, we're over here. We still have that past on our heels. They're both trying to escape it for different reasons. And the war they hid in at Bletchley Park became kind of fun. They could like use their brains and go to entertainments in the evening. But now they're in Vienna, now they're in Prague, and they're confronted with a decision they made from years ago to get married. And they're finally having to confront their relationship while the world falls around them. And I thought that was just a great, you know, in the Looney Tunes where you've got that wick on the end of the stick of dynamite and you see it going and going and you know any moment could explode. I really liked that idea of building that between these two people. They either have to confront what they have simmering inside or else. And I knew Simon's secret would get closer and closer, and I just hope I achieved a bit of that. But post-war really shows us what we cannot hide under, as you say, the cloak of courage and stiff upper lip. You're just, this is who we are.
So that actually in part answers one of the questions to Marilyn, I see, which you mentioned artifacts is important to the novel. What about buildings? Like as in London Restoration with churches?
And I do have, Marilyn, there are some churches, sadly, many got cut during edits because honestly, if left to my own devices, this would have been 600,000 pages long, just me describing churches. But I definitely do have, especially Stephansdom, St. Stephen's Cathedral, which is the heart of Vienna and still is. And the buildings that I chose were very specific to where I set the action in terms of this quartered city. Vienna was divided into four between the Allies, so the French, the British, the Soviets, and the Americans. And so I really chose buildings that reflected the action I wanted to see and drive and propel the plot. But I will say in London Restoration, it's the churches that the Brits decided to build first. In Vienna, they started with the opera houses. They started with the Bergs Theater and the Staatsoper. And so you see that even in Prague, I've got some of these beautiful theaters because Mozart was as performed in Prague as he was in Vienna. So it's very, very important to me to hopefully attain some sense of providing readers a canvas of you're not maybe there, but I want to make it so that you feel that these cities are the most tangible, palpable, wonderful places thrummed with music and history. So
I always
lots
did
of
think,
buildings.
and this is something I know as an former opera student, but it's like,
Yeah.
what I always loved about Vienna was, it tells you just everything you need to know about the national character of Vienna, that the State Opera House was the first building that was finished, I believe, and
Yeah.
rebuilt after the
Oh, yeah.
bombing in Vienna. It had been destroyed during the war. It was the first building that was rebuilt, and it was rebuilt with public money. Like the public literally was like, get the opera house up. We are not Vienna without the opera house. And the first one that they did, it wasn't Mozart, it was Beethoven, but they did Fidelio, which has the wonderful prisoners chorus where the prisoners come out of their jail into the light of day and they're blinking and they sing this beautiful chorus. And that was very intentional because it was very much the feeling of like, Vienna itself was coming out of this dark place and blinking in the sudden light of day. But it was like, hey, the day is here, peace is here. And so that really tells you everything you need to know about Vienna right there and how important it is.
It really is. You go to Vienna and you hear music on every corner. And there are moments when my characters are walking through Vienna, even in Prague. I mean, I have Prague have a musical certainty to it, so that every part of Prague that I describe becomes a stand-in for a symphony. The Charles Bridge over the river, the way that they see the castle. I really find that to understand those cities and to understand the Mozart Code, music is at the heart of it. The Mozart Code has a tertiary meaning, I find, the title. So hopefully people pick up on it, but it very much is a musical story. So hopefully it reflects well the city that inspired it. Really fun.
And you're such a music nerd. My God, that's another reason we bonded. I'm also a music nerd. If we have a question, sort of a 3-part question from Arlene. Cool. And that is, first of all, what is your favorite part of being a writer and your least favorite?
Oh my gosh. And do you know what? I have to temper these questions because honestly, I think most writers, there are 2 branches of writers right now. Those who felt the pandemic is amazing because I was able to escape in my writing. And those of us who are like, I will never finish the Mozart Code. I am editing it. Why did my brain break? I used to be able to write books. So I would say that my answer is going to reflect the fact that we're in a really exceptional time period.
Yes, we are.
My favorite part about writing is the moment where everybody shows up in my head and they start talking and I just take to their dictation. Not every author can hear, I've heard, the accent, the tenor, the timbre of their characters' voices, but I see them so visibly and physically, and I just love that, where you're attuned to what they're telling you, and that flood of ideas where you're like, oh my gosh, this is gonna work. It's amazing. My least favorite part of writing is, and I kind of fuse this into Simon, especially during the pandemic, working on my own, my insecure voices get very loud, and I hate the constant struggle of, is this good enough? This is the worst thing I've ever written. My editor is going to hate me. Nobody's going to like this. When you cannot see beyond the end, when you're in the 3rd or 4th draft, you're literally, I have a moment where Simon was stuck on the Charles Bridge meeting Jan Novak, a contact, and I couldn't see how to get him off. And I really hate those moments. I know they're part of the whole thing. But I'm sure in Diamond Dog, I mean, we've talked about this, Kate, where you have those moments where it's like, no, make it stop.
Yeah, it happens. And, it's like, just talking about the, writing in the pandemic, it's been so hard in sometimes. And it's like, it is an escape. I was one of the ones, I think I'm lucky that, like getting into a book.
You wrote fast.
I did for this, but that was literally because my muse, it literally took one look at the world around her in 2020 at the very end. Cause I drafted the whole thing during the run up to the US election, the election, and then the insurrection, and then the fallout and all of that. Yeah. That was the backdrop. And I think my muse took one look around and was like, I want to go to a spa. I want to go somewhere relaxing. I want to go somewhere where I can feel nourished and safe in contrast to what's around me. How about the World War II Russian front? That sounds great. And she just dived in headfirst and did not come out for like 3.5 months. So it's like, that's how that book got drafted so fast. That was pure escapism.
It was frantic and wonderful, and I loved it, because you will see when readers, you will see when you read Diamond Eye, that absolute energy and passion and imposition of, like, there are moments where it's like, she's angry, and I love it when she gets angry.
Well, the other thing about it, I was going to ask you about this too. Arlene, I know you have some more halves of your question. I'm going to get to them, I swear. But I was also thinking, because it leads to this, writing during the pandemic. Arlene wanted to know, if it's not a spoiler, what's your favorite scene from the Mozart Code? But I would also like to know, is there anything that, like, a scene that the pandemic made hard because it would have been nice to go or to research something?
Well, I was lucky because I did go to Vienna and Prague in December. I was there for 3 weeks in December 2019. So just before shutdown, specifically for Mozart Code, my last big hurrah. So I had it fresh in my head. I wrote a lot of descriptives on site. So I did have that. They're cities I've known pretty well from previous trips. I think that, I have to say that my favorite scenes in Mozart Code are the ones that I never actually thought would happen, because they needed to be refined and finessed so much. There is a night that Simon and Sophie spend at the Sacher Hotel, and it took like literal years. It took me 2.5 years to write that. I would keep going back. I love it. It just took so much to get that. One reviewer said that until that point, they had been a tango, but that scene, it becomes a waltz. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I don't remember who that was, but it's so good. And then there's another scene, as I mentioned, I had trouble getting Simon off the Charles Bridge. And it really was an emblem for how stuck I felt with everything that was going on in the world, breaking through the ice of writing, having my editor say, this is just too dark. It's getting so dark, Rachel. It's just not. And so I really,
my advice probably would have been, you can't get him off the bridge, push him off it, see what happens.
Oh, I had zombies show up at one point. I'm like, okay, editor Kim, this is taking a turn. There's vampires now. But I would say that, and any scene where they're together, and yeah. But was there another? So it was favorite scene, hardest. I mean, guys, it'll be 10 years from now and I will see Mozart Code in a bookstore and still be like, oh my gosh, I finished that? Like,
right? Yeah, I do think this is an example of how different we are as writers, because you ask you, what is your scene you had a hard time doing during the pandemic, and you're picking the scene with like all the emotional undercurrents and like what is it, how hard it is to do justice to complicated emotions, and how the layering of the love and the loss and the awkwardness and all of those wonderful things. You know what my hardest scene to plot was during the pandemic? It was the scene at the end where I couldn't go to Washington, D.C. And so, to travel for this. So I literally ended up plotting a sniper duel on Google Earth.
And dude, you guys have to know
you were all sensitive. You were all sensitive and worried about getting into the emotional depths here. And I will say the hardest part of mine, it was not emotional depth. It was me snarling. It was me snarling at like a guidebook. Like those recipes where we all get pissed off at the blogger, where it's like, will you stop telling me your life story and just give me the recipe?
Like how many minutes? And Kate,
and I was just left there sitting like, oh, for the love of God, woman, will you stop telling me how like you were like your walk through Rock Creek Park and your spiritual connection to Boulder Bridge over the Rock Creek, helped heal your soul after your midlife crisis and helped you find your joy in life. Will you please stop telling me about your joy in life and tell me if this creek is deep enough to sink a body in? That was my struggle. It was not
what we expect of you, but also the amount. I mean, I remember talking to you about your research just on that, and everybody's going to see this in about 3 weeks, but just the rifles in general. I mean, I know nothing about guns. So I remember one scene that was hard was like, where is everybody in this room? Somebody has to shoot someone else. I know nothing about guns. Where are Simon's glasses? It's always that stupid stuff. Like,
Logistics.
where are Simon's glasses? Where does he have them on? Yeah, that stuff it's hard.
Pretty tricky. Yeah, that's the way it goes. Action scenes can be hard, although that's when you end up diagramming like on a napkin, like who's where's the line of sight. Although that is better, that can be more, that's less fun than some of the napkin diagrams I have seen, because I have seen romance authors at romance conventions who write erotica, and their I have seen a foursome diagrammed on a cocktail napkin.
Logistics, though. It's
logistics.
If you're gonna Bridgerton, you gotta figure. I mean, in Bridgerton, we said Bridgerton has a coordinator for who's where when. Now,
what you gotta.
You're not going to get that level in Mozart code, by the way, everybody. That is not. It is not Bridgerton. But I think that everybody.
That scene at the soccer hotel. Oh my God! It's beautiful. It's tender, and there's definitely an amount of heat in it that will be perfect.
Yeah.
So, and again, the last question from Arlene: do you anticipate already the tension in your storytelling when you write, or do you have to create it?
Oh, that's a really good question. With Sophie and Simon, they were difficult because I'm not able to show their love story in the same way that a more traditional romance would be, because so much of it is through words and what they're not saying and what they're keeping inside. So a very good thing, what I found a very good way to kind of express it was something that I luckily explored in the London restoration, which were the 7 Greek forms and words of love that are identifiable ways that people express love back from the Grecian times. And so when I had that in a little check mark, I knew that I had to show the different kinds of love that Sophie and Simon have to demonstrate, and of course in very different ways. One thing that's not a spoiler, but hopefully makes the entire thing more exciting, the journey more exciting, is that Simon arrives first. He is madly in love with her. Sophie takes years to catch up, and she has to redefine what love is. So that was a bit of a challenge, because it really made me decide that there has to be points of tension throughout their relationship. Of course, there's flashbacks. We go back to the previous war. We go back to before World War II. And then it's like, who's getting where on, to use Simon's viewpoint, who's getting where on the chessboard when? And how do I make sure that the reader is with them? So Sophie will drive you nuts. She has driven many people nuts, but that's just because the tension imbalance has to work so that Simon's always ahead of the game and Sophie has to realize what he already has. And hopefully that provides enough tension for the reader. But that's a really cool question. And one we're going to do another Zoom where we ask Kate to explore how she did this in her Borgia duology and in the Huntress, because I have many, many questions for her. Sometimes I just yell at Kate on the internet. Kate Quinn, tell me about this, all caps. Because you do it so well.
Like, I'm eager to be distracted. It's always a fun thing to do. So a question from Renee, how do you focus in your writing and research while you're traveling abroad? I mean, is that something I've always wondered about, because I'm always so distracted by surroundings and people and taking it all in. It's hard to focus. And I will agree with that one.
It's really been, to this point, kind of easy, because I've chosen the setting when I choose the characters, when the characters come to me. So to this point, they've all been cities and places I already know well. So I did Boston for Van Buren and DeLuca. I did Toronto, my home, for Herringford and Watts. London Restoration was London, a place I knew. Vienna, I know well. So it was all about going back specifically for the book and trying not to fall down too many rabbit holes. And my approach is always, when I go on a research trip, it's, to this point, it hasn't been seeing a place for the first time where I'm lost in everything. It's pinpointing how does everyone get where they need to go? What are the places that I need to be able to paint in in depth so that people feel that they're transported there? But I do stumble upon really cool things. And one thing I stumbled upon in Vienna, I didn't even know what was happening, was an exhibition on the Culture Krieg architecture. So the Cold War architecture when I was there in 2019. And so I was able to go and look at these exhibitions that all the Allied occupants had created with their ideas of what Vienna should look like. And I was able to impart that in the story. But that's what I do on site is I write descriptions. I pretend my pen is my camera, and I walk where I hope the characters have walked. I try to compensate for places that have been bombed or perhaps shifted due to the natural way cities and towns progress over decades. And I just write things that I can infuse later. So hopefully people feel that they're there even though they haven't been. But you know this, it's a challenge over the pandemic. I mean, we authors, what did people do before Google Maps? I don't know.
I don't know. Google Maps was such a lifesaver, and
Yeah.
being able to put yourself down and like look around somewhere,
Yeah.
that was great. You have to work off of photographs, I guess, with a lot of places. And then, there are some things that it's like, I don't feel the need to go everywhere I've needed to go. I mean, like for the Diamond Die, I had, a lot of it takes place at the Russian front. And it's like, she fortunately had a lot of very good like descriptions in her memoir of what things looked like, right down to the flora and fauna. So I'm like, thank you very much. I hate researching flora and fauna. But it's like, I'm also trying to think like, do I need to, well, I could not have gone to Ukraine where all of her fighting took place,
Right.
even if I wanted to, because no vaccine, pandemic. But at the same time, I was like, do I really want to, I mean, like, is that the best use of my money and time? Because one foxhole, let me tell you, looks a lot like another. You're down in the dirt, you're down in the mud, and you're watching the bullets thrash the branches above your head. And I'm pretty sure her descriptions of that are probably going to be just as good as anything I could actually see on the ground. Although it would have been great to go to Odessa and Sevastopol, I have to say.
And you do have, I mean, the Huntress kind of set you up for the same flavor, right? Because Nina experiences so much it's slightly different, but I do find that there's a parallel in some of the wasteland and the barren wilderness that they both experience. But it's a really well described book, Kate Quinn.
Thank you. Sue Meister. Hi, Sue. Love you, Sue.
Hi, Sue.
On the weekend.
We love
said,
Sue.
Vienna of today is different from early post-war Vienna, but if you could have traveled during the pandemic that shall not be named, would you have gone? I know you did go in 2019, but and you've been before many times, but what would you have wanted to see if you could travel during 2020 or 2021?
Well, I'm actually experiencing right now. I'm working on a manuscript that's the book's coming out in September 2023. And gosh, how is it not 2020? It's been 2020 in my head forever. And it's set in
it's still 2020. We're on year 3 of 2020.
Yeah. So I would have gone, my next book is set in France, mostly in Rouen. It's a retelling of the Scarlet Pimpernel in occupied France. Kate has heard me yip about it. And I would have gone to do what I did before. I have been to these places before, but I go and I write descriptive work. So I'm hoping that maybe during the substantive edit stage, I could go over and just, funnel some things in. But that was the trip that I really wanted to take. That and some fun book tour stuff I was supposed to do for my travel book that came out on April the 1st, 2020, called Dream Plan Go, which turned into Dream Plan Stay in Your House, we're in lockdown. But I don't know about you, but my travel dreams are so often inspired by what I want to write about.
In part because then it's great to write it off in your taxes is absolutely necessary research.
Like Bletchley Park, we were there not too far apart from each other. In fact, that's a cool place to go if anyone's ever there. Yes. But I love Sue Meissner.
I think that actually also answers Vicky's question a little bit. Do you feel you can write your story without going to the physical site of the city that you're writing about?
I hope so. But what really makes me nervous is when the feedback to my stories are Rachel's strength. And sorry, not trying to toot my own horn here, but Rachel's strength is in providing an exceptional look at a city as if you are there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I can't get there, can I pull this off? So I am trying, as you know, and we're all adapting. And I think that writers are finding that they have to. I had to relearn how to write over the pandemic. I usually write in coffee shops or pubs where I have white noise. I don't often write at home, but I was forced to. So we're adapting to so many things. So all I can say is whenever, and Kate and I have talked about this extensively over the past few years, that whenever you read a book right now, remember that whomever wrote it from wherever in the world was going through something. Everybody is going through something. We are doing our best.
I don't know I don't know about you. Like, who's the Mozart Code dedicated to?
Oh, my friend Kat. My friend
That's
Kat.
nice.
Yeah, my friend Kat Chin, because she is just the most loyal, wonderful, sarcastic friend ever. So it is a story about loyalty in many ways. So it's dedicated to Kat.
I remember, but I wasn't sure who to dedicate the Diamond Eye to. And then what I ended up thinking about was that I finally dedicated it to anybody who wrote a book during the lockdown and during the pandemic, anybody who created art during the pandemic and during the lockdown, because it was really hard, wasn't it? I mean, it was a tough time. I mean, I absolutely mean that. If you're a professional writer and you had a deadline to meet, or if you just, you know, are doing watercolors at home for you and you were finding it hard to pick up that brush or, you know, pick up your knitting needles and finish that scarf you've been doing. I mean, like anybody who created something just for the love of art or for their love of their deadline, you know, during a pandemic, you know, this is for you. I mean, it was a hard time.
And you know, Danielle Steele found it tough to write. If Danielle Steele finds it tough to write, something's going on. But even really promoting, I mean, Kate, I promoted London. This is my second kind of pandemic release. London Restoration came out in August 2020. Rose Code came out last March, and it was a completely different way of engaging with readers. But there's also right now, as we're feeling, both Kate and I, you posted this, there is an entire world at war, and then it's like, buy my book. You feel
oh god, it feels awful. It feels like that Will Ferrell meme, you know, where there's like a city on fire.
Yeah,
he's doing this. You know, but it's like writers everywhere, you know, and then Will Ferrell it's like world on fire over here. Will Ferrell saying, anybody want to buy a book?
Anybody?
Oh God.
If there's a way that we can all identify with something that helps us engage with a past, you know, Sue Meissner's here, her Nature of Fragile Things, which is set in the aftermath of the San Francisco earthquake. I mean, a lot of people I know really identified with that. Her next one, actually, I don't know if she can talk, but I know that there's some Vienna in her next book, so that was fun to chat about. But yeah, it's a tough world, but we love stories, and Kate and I love other people's stories as much as we love writing our own. That's why we're like, did you read this? Did you read this?
So that's actually a question from Arlene. Do you have a story that you still aspire to write? Like the next one is Pimpernel, and that's coming out, and I can't wait for it. But what else? You want to mention it, because I know sometimes we keep these close to our chest because they're like these little fragile flowers that might die if you breathe on them too hard.
You don't want to jinx it. I will say that, you know, it's not called, we don't have a title for Pimpernel. I can guarantee it's not going to be called that, but I've always wanted to retell a classic in a different time period. So that's a bit of a heart book for me. It's also a really fun book because I get to use what I hope is attaining a sense of wit and humor as befits the hero. Kate and I both have similar backgrounds in that we ended up in the war area, but this is not really where our backgrounds are. Read her Borgia duology, please, and her Roman books, her Roman set books. But I am a huge fan of the Victorian period, and it's where my university studies were. And I haven't found an opportunity to do that yet. And I'd love to find an opportunity to set more books in Canada, but sometimes publishers just aren't going for that. And it can be difficult. So I have a lot of ideas, including some more stories that update classics, but Pimpernel is definitely a check-off dream of mine because I've always wanted to retell a classic story in a different framework.
So we have one more question from Gina, which is, besides the fact that he's so associated with Vienna, what is it about Mozart that makes him the right composer to be associated with this book?
I think that really there were so many different aspects. One, Mozart, this is a story about a guy who can't figure out what his relationship with his father is. The guy who raised him, as well as the mystery surrounding his real father. And Mozart and Leopold, in fact, I spent hours and hours, I have one of them here, I spent hours and hours trying to find an epigraph, and I ended up choosing something from a letter from Leopold to Mozart, his son, but that was a huge part. The mystery surrounding Mozart's death mask was a huge thing. The fact that he was buried in a pauper's grave, and yet he was Amadeus, his middle name, is God's beloved, somebody who had everything and genius and still ended up in such a human state. But what really drove it over the edge was the fact that both Prague and Vienna had a claim on him as a people's composer. So when we think about Mozart, we think of classical music and stuffy theaters, but he really was also played in the taverns at the time. People could hum his tunes. You could go and hear him raucously performed everywhere in the city, from the upper echelons to the lowest. And when you're dealing with something like the rise of communism, that leveling fact was really interesting to me. But there was also the fact that Vienna didn't really give him much of a send-off, but Prague, the streets were filled with a funeral for him. So we've got this dichotomy of two cities. One's about to fall behind the Iron Curtain, one does not. The composer I use represents both. But finally, I also use his adaptation of Handel's Messiah, which is either universally beloved or else completely hated, because he put his own Mozart twist on it. And how do we take something that's beautiful to some, but is seen as an absolute scourge by others? And when you read Simon's story, specifically somebody who is definitely not beloved, I really wanted to try and pinpoint how identity and belonging are such a huge part of this composer's influence even now. So hopefully that helps. Ramble.
And the thing that I'm taking away from that is, even when you're Mozart, you get bad reviews.
Even Mozart gets bad reviews. And Pete and I don't really share our bad reviews with the pub, but we have like a little message just like, okay, someone didn't like this. Why was I tagged in this?
Quit tagging authors in bad reviews.
Quit tagging authors.
Stop doing it. Write them. It's okay. I
Say
really
whatever
don't care
you
if
want.
didn't
We
like my
love
book.
it.
You don't need to
part of
promote
it, but we just don't need to know.
Please stop tagging authors. And you don't really even need to know it. It's
Martha
like,
Waters just said preach. I love Martha. She is a
I
book
love
coming up
Martha.
too.
I
I
love
love
Martha
Martha.
too.
Man.
There's so many fun people in this event.
I know,
So
it's
hello
like the
everybody.
best.
It's fun
Really.
seeing in the participants. It was fun looking at everybody. So and I'm so glad that you both brought up not only releasing books in COVID, but now with what's happening in Ukraine and last week. And we really struggled with, are we tone deaf in still doing what we're doing and bringing this out? And you know what? I almost feel like we're the balm, and we need to be soothing for people and get some distraction during hard times and sort of be the band on the Titanic, if you want to, just being there to give people something else to focus on for a little bit. So,
and words are power, right? I mean, we found that misinformation through words can be a weapon of warfare, that we see in the news, and how it can really damage. But the more we understand our past through fiction, the more we open the world, I
Right.
think the more empathetic we become. So hopefully we didn't see, Madeline Martin wrote that great Last Bookshop in London. We saw, and Natalie Jenner does it in her books as well, Jane Austen Society, Bloomsbury Girl. We see that people really use stories and able to empower themselves to be able to face what is happening around them. So hopefully with Diamond Eye and Mozart Code, we're giving people a chance to look through the lens of history to better understand what we're going through right now.
Exactly. And that is the thing that, but we want to be cognizant of, we don't just think it's this, fluff and I mean, we're just, while it is, and it's so wonderful having both of you here, and it has to be so hard to, like you said, go, oh, by the way, buy a book. But I think that people are aware of that and appreciate what we're all trying to do. So, Rachel, congratulations! Cannot wait for your book in a couple weeks. And Kate, you too. You just got a few more weeks for everybody to wait. So
thank you so much for having me here and giving us a chance to, just be able to gab away, which is always a great way to spend an hour.
It's always so much fun. And I always love, I'm sitting in the back and half the time I feel like hitting that, I want to be in on that. Because there's so many good things that you're talking about. So hope everybody had a great time watching. Pre-order Rachel's book from us, and also pre-order Kate's from us.
Absolutely.
Too. There's nothing wrong with doing a pre-order at an independent bookstore.
Two with one stone. Come on, just go.
Come on. It's a good thing. All right, everybody. Good night. And
thank you so much.
Kate, thank you. And Rachel, thank you.
Thanks,
bye.
Thanks, Julie. Bye-bye.